Hello and welcome. Today we are painting up an amazing bust from NomNom Studios. This is Karlach from Baldur's Gate 3. Absolutely wonderful tiefling with a big old axe, and she's going to be sat on a box with some barrels in the foreground. Really nice piece. NomNom Studios, incredible work, incredible detail. I'm going to be painting it up to my bronze tier level, so it's going to be a quick airbrush brush, a little bit of highlighting. So enjoy the process, grab a cup of tea, and let's get into it. All right, starting up, I'm going straight in with some corn red air into the airbrush. I like to use the Games Workshop air paints as they are just really nice. They're usually just pre-thinned, spray quite nicely. And this is what we're going to use to hit all of the skin tones on Karlach. It was a nice deep dark red as a base. We're going to focus the red more into the center. I want to keep some of the areas and the lighting darker towards the outside. But this is going to be a bright scene, so it's a daytime scene. So I'm not going to go too mad with the lighting today. Just want to make sure a little bit of that black is still coming through. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of Scale 75's basic flesh to that corn red. This is going to be the start of the highlight tone because she does have a skin tone rather than it just be like fully demonic red. So just adding a little bit of skin tone in there will brighten it off and just add a little bit more of a fleshy color to it. Just need to water it down. For this, I'm just going to add a little squeeze of water. So I'm going to spray this more controlled, and we're going to spray it towards her face and a bit more to her chest. And you know what? We completely forgot to do the tail on the other hand. So we'll be coming back and we'll be hitting that red again and just following these steps. Next up, we're going to think about this leather. There's quite a lot of leather on the model. I can't airbrush over this section. We'll have to do this by hand. But I can use the airbrush on all of this section here. I'm going to go with quite a dark brown tone. So I'm thinking of using Scale 75's brown grey mixed in with a very dark off black called German Camo Grey. So we'll see how that goes. Again, when airbrushing this, I'm just leaving a little bit of that black primer behind with this thin layer. Next up, we're just going to get out a number 2 brush or a base coating brush, and we're just going to start blocking in all of that remaining color there. So we've got to get all of these straps, all of the sections up here, all the bits where I didn't want to airbrush it because of the skin tones. We're just going to get all of that bit sorted, and yeah, I'll see you soon. All right, we've got a pretty much overall coat with the German camo grey. It might need a second coating, and we're going to use that brown grey to highlight things. There is a little bit of brown grey in the mix, especially in the airbrush section, but I tried to use the German camo grey to get the rest of it. The reason is it's a nice off black, so it's giving us a nice tone that we can wash down and that we can also build up. Mixes really nicely. So yeah, it's a good little state. It's a bit tricky to get around all of these bits without hitting any of the skin, so just take your time. There are a couple of bits I've missed, but I will come back to those and we'll sort them out. And we'll start highlighting. Alright, for highlighting up this brown, we're going to take some brown grey that we used earlier, the scale 75 brown grey, and then we're going to mix a little bit of that airbrush liquid. And with that, I'm just going to start edge highlighting and catching just little raised edges, not all of them. And we're going to stipple a little bit as well. Next up, we're going to wash the model with the dark tone wash from Army Painter. I do have Null Oil and a couple of others, one of the game color washes, but I actually really like the Army Painter washes. They seem to go down really well, they dry matte, all is good. Kind of like the old style Games Workshop washes. So these are a bargain as well, pretty cheap. You'll get yourself some of this if you can. So here we are after the ink has dried. So this is from a black dark toned ink, essentially Null Oil, over the top of those different greys. You can see that the larger leather straps of the brown grey are slightly browner in tone than the rest of the leather here. The boots were done with the brown grey. So because this is bronzed here, I'm not going to highlight this that much more, but I am going to add a couple of choice highlights now with the brown, just to make sure that these straps stand out a little bit more. These other straps here on the boots and on the wrists, I'm going to do as a dark, more standard brown, like Rhinoxide, Mornfang brown sort of colour, just to help keep things breaking up for this black. But we've added quite a lot of nice looking texture to this model already, and I'm quite happy with the result of that wash. I also want to add the golds in here, which is going to help. There's loads of like gold filigree bits and studs, which we'll do in a metallic. We'll get all those details done before we get going on the skin. So let's crack on. Let's add some more highlights to the brown areas first. Next up, we're going to be doing the metallics. So we're going to start doing the gold. And for that, I'm going to use the trusted Retributor Armor. Fantastic gold from Games Workshop. Really good coverage. As you can see, got a thick paint, so you don't really need to do multiple coats. I'll then be highlighting that with Liberator Gold, and then potentially mixing in a little bit more as well, we'll see. I usually use a wash like Reikland Flesh Shade or Soft Tone from Army Painter to wash down the gold, give it some more dimension. We're just going to be very careful now. Once we've got a nice base coat down of that gold, I'm just going to start adding a Reichland flesh shade to give it a rosy look. But I'm also thinking about adding a bit of soft tone ink as well, which is like a sepia wash, which I think will tie in nicely with the tones. Next, I'm taking some Liberator Gold from Games Workshop once again, and we're going to just be using this to edge highlight all of those areas. Once it's mixed, it looks a lot brighter. I'll just show you on the back of the brush. And I also like to mix a little bit of a silver in with it to really push a highlight, so it ends up looking quite bright. For this, we're just going to be touching the tops of the gold. Next, we're going to do the metallics on the armor pieces. And for that, I'm going to use a very dark metallic, like Ironbreaker. But I also have some Scale 75 Metal Alchemy. So I might have a little look at that, and I'll be back. So we've just added that base coat. I actually added a little bit of corn red to the charred brown. I'm now going to just add a little bit of pale sands colour, so like an off-white, and just mix it in with that brown for a highlight. Quickly go around and add a highlight to the tops of the leather. Next up, we're just going to start adding some red streaks to the hair. I've just base coated the horns as well in a mixture of like Ushapti bone with some of the brown mix from earlier. I'm going to use washes so that we've got a little bit of this horn colour coming through, but it still darkens it quite considerably because it's quite brown. So I use Agrax Earthshade for that, and we'll see how we go from there. To keep the hair simple, I've gone in with some base coats and using Mephiston red, so it's different from skin tone of corn red. It's a much brighter, more saturated red. And some of the undercoat is still coming through. I want a little bit of variation with that. I'm going to highlight that with Wild Rider red, and then we're going to highlight the black with a dark blue black, like Dark Reaper. And that way it's separate from the straps of the armor. We're then going to use, again, a black wash to knock that back. Again, this is a bronze tier commission, so it's been done with some shortcuts and stuff like that, but I still want it to look good, which is why we're using stuff like washes and highlighting. All right, let's crack on. This is the blue black I'm referring to, the Dark Reaper. I'll just put mine in a little squirty pot. I like to pair Dark Reaper with Fenrisian Grey when I'm doing black non-metallic metal, but it's good to highlight certain black colours as well. Just adds like more of a blue black tone, just looks quite nice. After the highlighting with the Dark Reaper, I then used a black wash. This time I used a Games Workshop Nuln Oil and just went all over all of the hair, and that just helped with any overbrush or underbrush and just tidied everything up. Darkening off those recesses, bringing in like the darker base tones in with the highlights, smoothing it all out. After that, we then added some Agrax Earthshade over the horn, just to really darken everything off nicely. I wanted a little bit more of a brown tone in there rather than going with a black wash, and that way just made it look a little bit more like a horn, texture, which we then highlighted later on. It's skin highlighting time, so to achieve this I took the corn red that we'd used earlier and the basic flesh tone mix, which we'd done a little bit of a mix for the airbrushing, and then added more of the basic flesh tone to that mix, thinned it down to kind of a thicker glaze consistency, and we started going around highlighting all of the like raised areas and areas that would catch the light a little bit. Remember, this is a bronze tier, so I'm not going into a huge amount of detail with this, layering up and getting a really smooth transition. I'm just trying to add focal points to the model and add some highlighting to where the light would catch. We then added a watered down Reichland flesh shade over the top of the highlighted skin. I did make a mistake with this because I added water to water it down that had been in my paint pot, and what that did is it added some extra little white pigment, as it were, or blank pigment. So when the wash dried, it left little deposits of sort of white where it was, which I then had to tidy up later. So it was possible to tidy it up, and I literally just got some water on a brush and sort of rubbed at those areas until that sort of white deposit came up. Or I painted over it with a darker corn red mixed in with a little bit of the black. Stuff like that. There was ways of correcting it, which we did. I'm just going to highlight up some of the horn quickly. I've just mixed a bit of Ushapti bone with the original charred brown colour. We then did a little bit more on the face, so the wash had dried on the face, and I just got some of that flesh tone that we just used, brought that back in on some of the upper, more raised areas of the face. I then added some pure Mephiston red over the lips. Tidied up the face more a little bit with some watered down Reichland flesh shade again, and just played a bit around with the highlights. I then did the eyebrows. So the eyebrows, I blocked in the colours with some Abaddon black, keeping it the same tone as the hair. Just being very careful around those eyes so we didn't ruin any of the work we'd just done. I then started on the eyes. So to start this off, I wanted to add a little bit of a thin down black just around the eyelids, just sort of adding that little effect of maybe makeup and just helping separate the eye from the skin just by darkening off that area. I then took an off-white pale sands tone and started to add it in, just thinned it down slightly so it wasn't going to run, and it just left one relatively opaque layer. Just being very careful with a small brush, just with trying to get just the tip of the brush to let down that little white pigment. I then took some Mephiston red, and just so it sort of matched with the hair tones, and added the iris. Just painting a little bit further in towards the centre, giving us a bit of a wider area to work with. And because it's a larger face with a larger scale, miniature is able to add quite a nice bit of detail to the eyes, just bringing that character in there. And then trying to sort of highlight and separate the white from the red. I used a black just to try and get a little line of it between the whites of the eyes and the iris, and I think that added a nice little depth surrounding the iris of the eye. I also used a little bit of the Evil Sun's Scarlet to just highlight some of the brighter parts of the iris. I then dotted the eye with that original bit of white, very, very small amount on the brush, taking a little bit off, so there's a very tiny amount on the brush. Just adding a dot into that upper right hand corner of each of the irises just gives that little reflection point, and we're basically there. I'm going to start adding the glow effect next, so I'm going to start adding some watered down Fire Dragon Bright just in some of the gaps in the flesh. Okay, to add a bit more glow, I'm going to be mixing in a bit of white now with this orange. I'm going to really, really brighten it off, and then we're going to glaze it back down again. So I've started off with the base, and I want it to be a little bit sandy, so I'm going to go for like a charred brown, like a iron oxide colour, and I've just mixed in a little bit of a sand tone into that, and it's given me like a kind of a warm chocolate colour, so that's kind of how it looks initially. We're going to put washes down on it, of course, so I'm just going to slot this on now. Next up, I'm just going to dry brush this tone with a bright sand tone, and we will hit it with a wash, probably Agrax Earthshade after that, just to give a nice like sandy, sort of dirty ground there. Then we're just going to slosh some Agrax Earthshade all over that base. So while that dries, we're just going to start base coating some of the other areas now. I'm going to pick out a different tone for the wood. So I've grabbed some Mornfang Brown and then Charred Brown, which I've been using quite a lot of. This is essentially iron oxide. Just mixing the two together, about 50-50. This is going to be the base coat for the barrel. I'm going to go lighter because, again, we'll hit it with some Agrax Earthshade, so wash it back again. So just to change the textures of the wood, I'm just going to take some pure Mournfang brown here and just sort of randomly apply it across the barrel. Just to sort of add a bit of textural difference to the wood very, very quickly. There we go. So well, now we've done that, we're just going to dry brush it with quite a light dry brush. So I've got a small dry brush here. It's quite dried out, to be fair, but that should still do the trick. I'm just going to take some Mournfang brown, add a little bit of a sand tone to it, or a brighter tone. Applying some of it quite loosely as well without taking a lot of the paint off to get a nice sort of texture going on. There we go. So it's already starting to look nice and a bit different. Some of those wood textures. Been quite rough with this dry brush. It's a solid piece of resin, this, so it's not going to take any chipping or damage. All right, so we're going quite bright here because when we hit that Agrax Earthshade over the top, it's going to knock everything back. Now let's slosh that wash. I'm going to just water it down a little bit. There we go. So we hit all that with the wash now, wait for that to dry, and then we'll have a nice looking, fairly realistic looking bit of wood very quickly. Very, very quickly. I can potentially touch it with a couple of highlights later, but I think I'm quite happy with where it is at the minute. We just need to decide on a cloth colour and a tone for these vases. I'm thinking I'm going to have a little test. I'm going to do like a cream colour for this canvas that's over the box, and then see how we look before I do the clay pots. So what I'm going to do is I'll start off with something like Ushak the Bone, and then build that up. So this will make it colour quite nicely. For an off-white, coverage is generally not great, so this will require multiple. I'll just move her out the way just in case. So I decided to go with like a more of a baby blue for those pots, because I think it's just going to contrast nicely with all the red from Karlach herself. And I'm going to weather it down. I'm just waiting for that paint to dry, but just wanted to quickly show you that. Essentially just mixed in a turquoise with the same white that I used here, which is like a Mojave white. It's like a sort of off-white. Just sort of added it, tried to be a bit more random with it. Once I've washed it back again, it'll look like old pottery essentially, which is what we're going for. So here we are with the base. After a little bit of dry brushing, washing and the like, I just need to do the metallics and the little bits extras like the ropes and these planks of wood. I've already done some wood cover on them already, so I just want to add the ropes. For the ropes, I'm going to use Japanese Uniform from Model Colour. I actually quite like this colour. I use it for non-metallic metals as well, for golds, but I think it does a really good rope colour, especially when washed back with a darker brown. And you can also dry brush it with a lighter tone as well. Just picks it out really nicely. up we work on the metallics. So I've got the metal alchemy set. I'm going to be using dark metal and heavy metal from that range. One's very, very dark, much darker than like lead belcher, and the other one's probably around a lighter sort of tone, and that way I can sort of customize where I want to go with it. We've got excellent coverage, way better coverage than most GW metallics, and they mix beautifully. So I'm going to probably go 2 to 1. So go for dark metal with a splash of heavy metal to brighten it up slightly, because I'm going to be applying a Agrax Earthshade wash. Next up we've got the axe. We're just going to basically, I've just added charred brown to the wood at the minute. I'm going to do probably a cream wrap, or like a wrap here, and then we'll do the metallics. For the metallics, I'm going to stick with very dark colours and then highlight it with chips and jags. So off we go. So for the metallics, I'm going to be using pure dark steel as the initial base coat. So now we've added the dark metal. We're just going to take some pure heavy metal, and we're just going to go with a smaller brush and just play into some of these lines and chips in the axe, just to exaggerate some of the burnishment and chipping on the steel. So heavy metal, got a bright metallic, and we'll just start chipping into it. Same on the other side. So next, now we've added that texture to the blade, we're just going to go round these edges. Next up, I'm going to use Speed Melt. It's a really bright metallic. Next up, I'm just going to add some pure cream tone into the previous mix, which I did for the bindings, the wrappings. Next up, I'm going to take some Nuln Oil and then I'm going to start adding this to Axe. Now we assemble. All I need to do is just get some super glue and just carefully apply it and just slot them into the correct slots. So she will sit here on the barrel, the bit of rope basically just sits there, and these planks sit against the this container here. And there she is in all her glory on the spinny plate. I hope you enjoyed her as much as I enjoyed painting her. If you want to see more of these sorts of print and paint tutorials, please like and comment and subscribe. Let me know below just what you want me to paint next, really. And if you enjoyed it, hopefully you've learned something. So enjoy the rest of the spinniness, and I'll catch you next time.